Grief pressed down on Mariah, turning days into a blur of muted hours and sleepless nights. The little house that once pulsed with warmth now felt hollow, haunted by the absence of Daniel's voice, his laughter, his gentle presence. His chair remained untouched at the table, his book unopened on the nightstand, a silent reminder that he was gone, leaving her adrift in the empty echo of what had been. But sorrow was not her only adversary. On the horizon loomed Vivian Strong, a woman of stature and calculation, whose sharp elegance cloaked a heart of steel. For years she had ruled Daniel's world with an iron grip, her wealth and pedigree shaping every corner of his life. In Mariah, Vivian saw an intruder, someone who had lured her son away from the gilded orbit of the Hale family's legacy. He was strong, vibrant, Vivian declared at the wake, her voice like a blade honed to perfection. Her eyes, cold and piercing, never left Mariah. Men his age don't simply collapse. The insinuation lingered, bitter and heavy. Mariah's fingers tightened around Daniel's ring, her silence the only shield she had left. Vivian pivoted gracefully to her guests, but her disdain followed Mariah like a shadow clinging to her skin. By morning, that shadow erupted into a storm. Vivian ordered an autopsy, insisting on answers. Her husband, Robert Hale, quiet and restrained, attempted to steady her fury, but grief had sharpened into suspicion, and suspicion into vendetta. Lawyers, investigators, whispers, Vivian unleashed them all. Pulling Mariah deeper into the current, Mariah fled to her sister Clara's cramped home across town, a refuge cluttered with books, mismatched cups, and the comfort of unconditional loyalty. Clara's words wrapped around her like armor. You don't have to stand against her alone. She's wrong, and you know it. Yet the siege never slowed. Lakeshore buzzed with rumors, gossip born in church pews and carried on the early winds of the internet. A photograph surfaced. Mariah at 20, fiery-eyed at a protest, a brush with the law now spun into a tale of recklessness and danger. Her job slipped away. Headlines painted her as unstable. Still she bore it all, clinging only to the memory of Daniel's love. Then the autopsy report arrived. Mariah opened it in Clara's kitchen, her hands trembling as she traced the clinical words. Among them, a revelation. A DNA test Daniel had quietly pursued before his death. The result confirmed his suspicion. Robert was not his biological father. Daniel had hinted at secrets, but never fully shared them. Now the truth lay bare, reshaping Mariah's understanding of the man she had loved. She had no wish to wound the Strong family with this knowledge, yet Vivian's unrelenting war left her cornered. To remain silent was to be crushed. To speak was to risk detonating the family's carefully guarded facade. As autumn descended, leaves scattering across the small town like fragments of old stories, Mariah made her choice. She would face Vivian, not to wound, but to tell the truth, because love deserved clarity, and Daniel's memory deserved honor. Vivian's pain was real, but so was hers, and if it took her own voice to cut through the venom, then she would speak. Mariah first met Daniel on a late spring afternoon at the town library, where she worked part-time to help pay for night classes. She remembered it vividly. He had walked in looking slightly out of place in his tailored jacket, searching for a book on local history. His voice was warm but tentative when he asked for help, and Mariah, amused at the sight of someone so polished fumbling with the card catalogue, guided him through the shelves. What began as a simple request turned into an hour-long conversation about family roots, forgotten traditions, and the quiet charm of small-town life. Daniel returned the next week, and the one after. At first, Mariah assumed he was simply fascinated by history, but soon realized it was her laughter, her sharp observations, and her ease with the world that drew him back. He was a man raised in a gilded cage. Business dinners, etiquette lessons, expectations lined up like stepping stones. In Mariah, he found something unpolished but true. They began meeting outside the library, first for coffee, then for walks by the river, where he confessed he hadn't felt free in years until he met her. Their love grew quietly, like ivy winding up a stone wall, steadfast, patient, unstoppable. Mariah challenged him, teased him, made him laugh until his sides ached. Daniel, in turn, offered her steadiness, a listening ear, and a devotion that never wavered. By the end of that year, they were inseparable, their bond deepening with every stolen glance and shared dream. But Vivian Strong noticed. Daniel's mother, formidable and exacting, had built her life on preserving appearances and curating alliances. To her, Mariah was not a love story but a disruption, a woman with no pedigree, no fortune, and worst of all, a mind of her own. Vivian's disapproval surfaced in carefully worded remarks at family dinners, in veiled questions about Mariah's ambitions, in the way her smile cooled whenever Mariah entered the room. Daniel, though respectful, refused to bend. He told his mother plainly that Mariah was the woman he intended to marry, and for the first time Vivian realized her influence could not steer him. That defiance only deepened her resentment, yet for Daniel and Mariah the disapproval became background noise. They leaned on each other, their love an anchor in the storm, certain that what they shared was worth weathering every glare, every whispered doubt. Back in the present, Mariah lay awake in Clara's spare bedroom, staring at the cracks in the ceiling as if they held answers she couldn't find. Her life, once vibrant, once full of laughter and warmth, had been reduced to silence and suspicion. 4 walls, a borrowed bed, and a town that now turned its back on her. Vivian's venom seeped everywhere, poisoning friendships, staining memories of Daniel, and wrapping her grief in shame. Every look in Lakeshore carried judgment. Every whisper felt like a knife. Clara, fierce as ever, refused to let her sister crumble. One evening, she burst into the room, arms loaded with takeout boxes and determination. "We're eating," she declared, dropping the bags onto the wobbly table by the window. Mariah pushed herself upright, eyes rimmed red. "Clara, I can't—" "You can," Clara cut in sharply. "Because if you don't, Vivian wins. And I refuse to let that woman write the end of your story." Mariah blinked down at the food, the faintest spark of hope stirring. Clara was right. She still had her sister. That had to mean something, but peace was short-lived. The next morning's paper screamed across its front page. "Widow's dark past. Arrest raises questions in strong scandal." The article dragged out the mugshot from her college days, her arrest at a protest for criminal justice reform, twisting it into a tale of recklessness and danger. The photo alone was enough to ruin her in a town like Lakeshore. Clara stormed into the kitchen, the newspaper crumpled in her fist. "This is war," she hissed. Mariah folded over the table, tears spilling hot and fast. "It doesn't matter what I say. No one will believe me." Clara crouched beside her, gripping her shoulders. "Then we stop letting them speak for you. We tell the truth ourselves, but how?" Vivian's reach stretched everywhere. The council, the police chief, even the church pews. Mariah felt as if she were drowning, and Vivian's hand was the one pushing her under. A week later, a knock came at Clara's door. Standing on the porch was Robert Strong. He looked older than Mariah remembered, grief carved into his face. "I need to talk to you," he said quietly. Inside, on Clara's worn couch, Robert folded his hands. His gaze was steady but full of regret. "I'm sorry for what Vivian has done. She's lost in her grief. But I've read the report. I know Daniel wasn't my blood. He was still my son in every way. And I know he loved you." The words hung heavy, unexpected. Mariah had braced for judgment, not quiet solidarity. "You're not alone," Robert said as he rose to leave. "And I'll do what I can to stop this." For the first time in weeks, Mariah felt the wall around her grief crack. Vivian's storm hadn't passed, but Robert's words lit a small, stubborn flame inside her. Maybe, just maybe, she had enough strength left to fight back. The drive to the Strong estate stretched on like an unending trial, every mile pressing harder against Mariah's chest. By the time the mansion came into view, its sprawling lawns, trimmed within an inch of perfection, its facade glinting with wealth and old power, she had steadied her breath. This place had always made her feel small. Not today. Today she carried truth, and no amount of marble columns or chandeliers could strip her of it. When she stepped out of the car, The sting of late autumn wind cut through her coat. Before she could knock, the grand doors swung open. Vivian Strong stood framed in the entryway, her poise as sharp as her contempt. "What are you doing here?" Vivian demanded, her tone dipped in disdain, her pearls glinting in the light. "I need to speak with you." "And Robert?" Mariah answered, her voice even, steady despite the knot in her stomach. Robert appeared behind Vivian, his grief-worn face etched with caution. "Come in," he murmured, stepping aside. Vivian exhaled in irritation, but swept toward the sitting room, leaving Mariah to follow. The room reeked of wealth and silence. Mariah placed a folder on the glass coffee table, her fingers trembling. "I didn't come to argue," she began. "Daniel discovered something before he died, something you deserve to know." Vivian's eyes narrowed. "And what could you possibly know that I don't?" Mariah ignored the barb. She looked to Robert, who lowered himself into an armchair, already weary. He already knew why Mariah was there. "Daniel had questions about his ancestry," she said gently. "He took a DNA test. The results are here." She opened the folder. "Robert, Daniel wasn't your biological son." Robert's hands shook as he reached for the papers. Vivian's face went rigid, but her silence faltered for the briefest moment. Then with a sudden lunge she snatched the folder. "This is fabricated," she hissed. "A desperate attempt to salvage your own name." Mariah's gaze held steady. "Daniel found this himself. He didn't tell you because he loved you." Robert's eyes brimmed with tears as he turned to his wife. "Is it true, Vivian?" Her lips pressed into a thin line, then cracked. "It was a mistake," she said coldly, voice trembling. "A moment I buried. It meant nothing." Robert flinched as though struck. "Nothing? You let this secret poison our family." Before Vivian could retort, the doorbell rang. Mariah rose to answer, unsure why. When she opened the door, her breath caught. Cody Whitman, broad-shouldered, his silver hair combed neatly, his presence commanding, stood waiting. "Cody," Vivian whispered, color draining from her face. "Hello." "Vivian," Cody replied, stepping inside with quiet authority. His gaze shifted to Robert. "It's been a long time." Robert's jaw tightened. "Business rivals." "And more," Cody said, his eyes on Vivian. "It's time the truth is spoken." Vivian's mask cracked, fury and fear mixing in her stare. "Leave, now!" But Cody stood firm. "Daniel was my son. He reached out to me before he died. He wanted to know his roots, but he made it clear you, Robert, were his father in every way. He didn't want to hurt you." The air thickened. Robert's face crumpled under the weight of betrayal. "You lied," he rasped, turning to Vivian. "To him, to me, to all of us. I protected him." Vivian cried, her voice breaking at last. "I did what I had to do to preserve this family." "No," Robert said, standing, anger sharpening his grief. "You preserved yourself, and in the process, you've destroyed everything." The silence that followed was suffocating. Mariah took a step back, realizing the truth she carried had detonated the strong family, carefully constructed world. She had not meant to tear them apart. But the lies had done that long before she arrived. Robert finally turned to her, his expression lined with sorrow, but touched by sincerity. "Thank you, Mariah. Daniel deserved to have his truth honored. You've given him that." Vivian's face drained of color, her carefully constructed mask faltering. Robert sat on the edge of his chair, confusion etched deep into his lined face as recognition flickered in his eyes. "Cody Whitman," Robert said slowly, bitterness lacing his voice. "What are you doing here?" Cody's gaze swept to him, a subtle acknowledgement passing between the two men. "I'm here because of Daniel," he said, his voice calm, but weighted with truth too long buried. Mariah shifted to the side, uncertain whether to retreat or stand her ground. The tension vibrated through the grand sitting room like a live wire. Cody's presence was commanding, not aggressive, but it unsettled everything. His eyes finally settled on Vivian, who stood rigid, her hands betraying the slightest tremor. "You have no place here," Vivian snapped, her words sharp but undercut by panic. "This is my home. You don't belong." Cody's voice cut through the air, quiet but piercing. "No place? I think I have every right, considering the secret you've kept locked away for decades." Robert rose abruptly, his chair scraping across the marble floor.
What secret?
He demanded, his grief-spent voice breaking. Cody hesitated, his gaze flicking briefly to Mariah before returning to Robert. Vivian never told you. She never told either of us. Robert staggered, his face pale, searching Vivian's silence for denial. But her wide eyes and stiff posture spoke louder than anything she might have said. He's lying. Daniel is not his son. You're his father, Vivian blurted suddenly, her voice too sharp, too frantic. Cody has always envied you, always wanted to tear this family apart. Enough, Cody said firmly, his tone like steel. Lie to yourself if you must, Vivian, but don't lie to them anymore. Daniel came to me. He wanted to understand where he came from. He told me everything, his doubts, his search, and most of all, his love for you, Robert. Robert crumpled back against the fireplace mantel, his hand braced against it. He knew? His voice cracked. And he didn't tell me. Mariah stepped forward gently, her voice steady, though her heart ached. He didn't want to hurt you. Daniel said you were his father in every way that mattered. He loved you too much to change that. Robert turned to Vivian then, his grief sharpening into fury. Why? Why would you keep this from me? From him? I did it for us. Vivian cried, her control finally shattering. For this family. Daniel was my son. I wasn't going to let one mistake with Cody destroy everything. Robert's voice thundered, raw with betrayal. You built this family on lies. You robbed Daniel of the truth. You robbed me. I protected him, she shouted. But the words rang hollow in the heavy air. Robert turned away, shoulders bowed, grief overwhelming him. I loved him, like my own, and now he's gone, and I'll never get the chance to... His voice broke completely, silence swallowing what he couldn't finish. Mariah's eyes filled. He loved you, she whispered. No secret could ever change that. Cody's jaw tightened, his presence steady as Robert fought for composure. Vivian, stripped of her control, stood cornered by truths she could no longer bury. You've ruined everything, she spat at Cody, her venom lashing one last time. No, Vivian, Cody said, his voice low, resolute. You ruined it the day you decided truth was too dangerous to face. Daniel was a good man, a better man than either of us deserved. He didn't need your lies to make him whole. Robert turned to Cody, his grief hollowing his tone. What do you want? Nothing, Cody replied. I only came so you would know. Daniel sought me out, but he made it clear you were his father. I won't take that from you. He looked toward the door. I'll leave after this. Robert gave a faint nod, too tired for anything more. Cody's eyes softened when they found Mariah. Daniel chose well, he said simply before walking out. The door shut with a heavy echo, leaving Vivian seething. She whirled on Mariah, her rage snapping like a whip. You've torn my family apart! Mariah lifted her chin, her voice calm but strong. No, Vivian, the lies did that. I only gave Daniel's truth a voice. Robert stepped between them, his voice steady despite the tremor beneath it. Enough, Vivian. Leave her be. This ends here. Vivian's fury twisted her face, but Robert's presence silenced her. She stormed away, her heels striking the marble with furious rhythm. Robert turned back to Mariah, his voice softer now. Thank you, he murmured, for loving him, for standing by him. Tears brimmed in Mariah's eyes. He was my world. When she stepped back into the night, the cold air filled her lungs like a promise. The truth had torn open wounds, but it had also freed her. Daniel's memory was untarnished. And for the first time since losing him, Mariah felt a flicker of strength, a fragile but undeniable hope to begin again. The fallout from Robert's declaration was swift and unrelenting. Lakeshore, a town that thrived on gossip and appearances, turned into a crucible of judgment for Vivian Strong. For decades, she had wielded her influence like a weapon, shaping councils, guiding charities, dictating the unspoken rules of status. But now, the same network she once commanded cut her loose. Robert wasted no time filing for divorce. His legal team moved, with the precision Vivian had once been known for, striking quickly, cleanly, and without compromise. Then came his public statement. I can no longer condone a life built on deceit. My wife's actions betrayed not only me, but the memory of our son, Daniel. The words sent shockwaves through Lakeshore. Allies withdrew. Charities stripped Vivian's name from their boards. Invitations to galas and luncheons evaporated. For the first time in decades, Vivian found herself alone, her kingdom of influence reduced to whispers and pitying glances. While the strong empire collapsed, Mariah felt the first fragile hints of reprieve. True to his word, Robert defended her publicly, calling her a pillar of dignity in the face of unimaginable grief. His words rippled across the community. Neighbors who once crossed the street to avoid her now stopped to offer quiet apologies. Even her former employer hinted at a return, but Mariah wasn't ready to go back. Too much had shifted. The scars of Vivian's campaign still marked her, and she was determined not just to survive, but to reclaim her voice. Vivian, humiliated and exiled, refused to accept defeat. Desperation fueled her final play. She hired yet another investigator to dig deeper into Mariah's past. If she could unearth some damning secret, perhaps she could claw her way back into relevance. But Mariah was ready this time. With Clara's help, she'd been collecting her own trail of evidence, emails, recordings, and testimony from those who had seen Vivian's manipulations firsthand. So when the investigator began circling, Mariah struck first. She filed a harassment claim, presenting her evidence to the authorities. The move flipped the narrative entirely. Reporters now painted Vivian as vindictive, a woman undone by her own schemes. It was the final unraveling of a reputation once untouchable. In the midst of chaos, an unexpected alliance grew between Robert and Cody. Once rivals in both business and pride, they now shared the same grief, the same love for Daniel. As winter gave way to spring, Mariah began rebuilding. She poured her grief and resilience into writing, crafting a memoir that wove together her love for Daniel, the battles she had faced, and the power of truth. Clara urged her to submit it, and to their surprise, a publisher embraced it. Shadows of the Heart became a local sensation, raw, haunting, and unflinchingly human. Beyond the page, Mariah returned to the causes she once believed in. She spoke publicly on criminal justice reform, advocated for mental health resources, and helped grieving families find support. For the first time, she felt purpose bloom again, her pain reshaped into something that could help others. On the anniversary of Daniel's death, Mariah visited his grave. The autumn air was crisp, the leaves swirling golden around her. She knelt, tracing his name with her fingertips. "I miss you every day," she whispered. "But I promise, I'll carry your love with me always." When she rose, she saw Robert approaching, sunflowers in hand, Daniel's favorite. They shared a quiet smile as he laid the flowers down. No words were needed. Their shared grief bound them in silent understanding. A year later, the bookstore on Main Street had never seen such a crowd. Its windows glowed with warm light against the chill of early evening. The glass painted with hand-lettered words, "Shadows of the Heart, book launch with Mariah Strong." Inside, rows of chairs had been set up between the shelves, every one of them filled. The air buzzed with anticipation, whispers weaving through the crowd as townspeople craned their necks for a glimpse of the woman who had lived through scandal, grief, and public vilification, and emerged standing. Mariah stood in the small back room, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the necklace Daniel had given her on their first anniversary. Clara was at her side, straightening the collar of her blouse, her expression equal parts proud and protective. "You're ready," Clara said softly. Mariah exhaled slowly, willing the knot in her chest to loosen. "I just hope my words reach them." "They will," Clara replied, her hand squeezing her sister's, "because they're yours." When the store manager signaled, Mariah stepped onto the small platform at the front of the room. Applause erupted, hesitant at first, then building into something stronger, warmer. She blinked back tears as she looked out across the faces, neighbors, former colleagues, even people who had once whispered against her. And in the back row, Robert stood beside Cody, both men somber but present, a quiet acknowledgement of the man they had both loved. Mariah's voice wavered only slightly as she began. When I started writing Shadows of the Heart, I didn't intend for anyone to read it. It was survival, a way to find my footing after losing Daniel, a way to speak when the world seemed determined to silence me. She paused, her gaze sweeping the room. But as the pages grew, I realized this wasn't just my story. It was about all of us, the truths we bury, the battles we fight when no one believes us, and the resilience it takes to stand again. The room was utterly still. Mariah read a passage from the book, her voice soft but sure. The chapter about Daniel's laughter in the kitchen, the sunlight in his hair, and the promise they had made to always choose truth, even when it hurt. By the time she closed the book, tears shone in more eyes than her own. When the signing began, people came forward one by one, books pressed to their chests. Some offered hugs, others murmured apologies. A few simply said thank you. Each word, each gesture, chipped away at the isolation that had once suffocated her. Toward the end of the line, Robert stepped forward, his copy of the book tucked under his arm. He didn't speak right away, simply placed a sunflower on the table between them. Daniel would be proud, he said finally, his voice thick. Mariah's hand trembled as she signed his book. I hope so, she whispered. When the last person left and the store quieted, Clara slipped an arm around Mariah's shoulders. The night outside was cold, but inside, Mariah felt the warmth of something she had thought she'd lost forever. Belonging. Not to the gossip of Lakeshore, but to herself. For the first time since Daniel's passing, she believed in tomorrow, and as she stepped out into the autumn night, her book in hand, she knew she had not just survived, she had found a way to live again. The end. Thanks for listening to Green Tea Tales. Help support our channel with like, share, comment, and subscribe.